Hello, my name is Raven Dickerson, and I am a student here at Drake State pursuing a degree in Computer Information Systems. I am here to present to you our speaker, Heather Adkins, who is an archivist for downtown Huntsville Library. Heather Adkins is a certified archivist who received her bachelor's degree in history from Tennessee Tech University and her master's degree in public history for archives management from Middle Tennessee State University. Heather's time working at the Tennessee State Library and Archives prepared her to take on the role of manager of the Special Collections Department of the Huntsville-Madison County Public Library System in 2018. In this position, she has improved community access to local history in many ways, including creating a hometown history video series for the library's YouTube channel and securing grants for traveling history exhibits and a community digitization project. While most of her days are spent planning educational programming and talking to donors, she still finds time to conduct historical and genealogical research. Heather enjoys creating new ways to showcase the department's historical collections and rare books, and will talk the ear off of anyone willing to listen to her describe its many merits. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mrs. Heather Adkins.
All right, hello, and thank you for allowing me to present today on the interesting topic of Huntsville's historic Black schools. For this presentation, I'm going to mainly focus on Huntsville, although some county schools might be mentioned peripherally. I'm also going to focus more on the schools we have information about, while others may be skipped because we only know a name or even possibly a date. We're going to start very early in Huntsville's history as well, so we can see how education for Black students developed over time. So let's jump right in with Huntsville's earliest schools. Education in antebellum Alabama was privately funded, and male and female students were separated. Some middle and upper class Alabamians sent their children to school, but many were educated in home by private tutors. Those who wanted to send their children to school paid for private education, putting education out of reach for poorer class whites. Yeoman farmers often valued teaching children the basics of survival and how to work and live off of the land over mathematics, reading, grammar, and geography. In Huntsville's free Black community, an education in life skills and basic education may have been similarly valued. On the other side, enslaved Black people received no formal education. Beginning in 1833, it was a finable offense to educate slaves in Alabama. Despite this, some slaves were taught to read and write, and they in turn taught others. Many slaves were educated in trades because having that skill set would be valuable to slave owners. Slaves who could read, write, and knew arithmetic could conduct business on behalf of their enslaver. Russ Normal Institute, located on Townsend Street, was established in 1865 by the Freedmen's Bureau and the Methodist Episcopal Church. It was created to educate Huntsville's newly emancipated Black community. And notable Huntsvillians such as Thomas Townsend, Daniel Brandon, S.L. Carter, William Council, Charles Hendley, and Henry Benford were teachers at this school. In antebellum Huntsville, churches played an important role in education. Many of Huntsville's early private schools were established by a church, including the Huntsville Female Seminary and the Huntsville Female College. In order to read religious teachings, citizens had to be literate. Thus, churches saw it as their duty to educate the community. Education directed by the church also allowed the church to indoctrinate young people with the Christian moral code. After the Civil War, the church was instrumental in providing opportunities for an education for Huntsville's Black community. In addition to the Russ Normal School, Black churches known to run at least partially publicly funded schools were St. Bartlett's Primitive Baptist Church, Lakeside Methodist Church, St. John's African Methodist Church, the Second Cumberland Presbyterian Church, and the Missionary Baptist Church. Churches were likely so integral to the education of African Americans because the Black community could not fully rely on the infrastructure in place and the white community to fund education for Black people. Also, much of Huntsville's Black adults desired an education, not just children, and Huntsville's Black churches attempted to meet that need. In Alabama in the early 1900s, nearly half of the population was Black. However, only 20% of Black children were enrolled in school compared to the 60% of white children. Additionally, schools for Black children did not usually teach higher grades. Black teachers tended to have less education and were paid less than white teachers. The curriculum for poor white and Black children in the rural South focused on practical lessons: reading, writing, arithmetic, agriculture, sewing, and cooking. This pragmatic approach neither prepared rural children for higher education nor encouraged them to pursue it, preventing them from improving their position in society. The first public school for Huntsville's Black students was named for the founder of the Alabama A&M University, William Hooper Council. The school was founded in 1867 in the basement of the Lakeside Methodist Episcopal Church. In 1892, the school was moved onto the land where Council High School was later built and made into a wood frame building. The first diplomas were granted in 1912. In 1927, the city built a two-story brick building to replace the wood frame one, and Reverend J.F. Humphrey became principal. Around 1950, Council High School added 2 wings with a gymnasium, dining room, kitchen, and library. The school housed grades 1 through 12 until 1966, when the last class graduated. And the schools closed shortly after due to desegregation. So it's important to note that while the schools were developing, there were a lot of people in different areas of the community supporting the education of Black Huntsvillians. Daniel S. Brandon was born into slavery in Huntsville. He was elected in 1880 to serve as one of the city's first Black aldermen, also known as a councilman. Also in 1880, Brandon received the honor of serving as a delegate to the Republican State Convention, and he was appointed a census enumerator for the city of Huntsville. Brandon was an educator who was the principal of Huntsville City Schools for African American and Children for 8 years, and went on to teach at the Huntsville Normal School in 1881. In 1882, Brandon and his wife Maria moved to Washington, D.C. to fulfill an appointment as a government pension clerk, and they lived out the remainder of their lives in Washington, Brandon passing away sometime around 1935. Brandon is often confused with his nephew, who has the exact same name, and he was a prominent brick mason in Huntsville and also served as the city alderman. So if this gentleman interests you for further research, just be aware that there's 2 Daniel Brandons who were aldermen. Someone else that was influential, starting in 1907, Huntsville schools were under the jurisdiction of a 5-member board. The school board was appointed by the city council until 1972, when it was decided school board members would be elected. Fletcher Elden was the first Black person to campaign for and win an elected seat for the Huntsville City School Board in 1972, after it would be decided that members should be elected. He had been previously appointed to the position. He served 9 years on the school board, including 2 terms as president. He was a native of Maryland and joined the Army in 1946 when he turned 18. He remained in the Army for 23 years and was involved in World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. He came to Huntsville in 1958 as a missile and electronics instructor at Redstone. He married Ruth Washington of Huntsville in 1959, and the couple had 6 children. He retired from the Army in 1969 and went on to work for Model Cities, a federal program which sought to improve living conditions in the heart of participating cities. He later became community relations specialist the Marshall Space Flight Center. So let's get back to talking about the development of schools. Rosenwald schools played a huge role in southern rural areas, and we wouldn't have Rosenwald schools without Julius Rosenwald. He was a businessman and a philanthropist who, among many other contributions, helped fund schools for African American children in the rural South. In 1906, Rosenwald met Booker T. Washington, who at the time was president of Tuskegee University, and would later serve on the board of directors for Tuskegee. Washington's influence, coupled with Rosenwald's desire to increase equity for the Black community in the face of Jim Crow laws, that would eventually result in the Rosenwald Fund. Ultimately, Rosenwald's philanthropy resulted in the construction of 4,977 school buildings in the rural South between 1917 and 1947. Booker T. Washington was an educator, author, and orator who was born into slavery and freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. He was a principal at the Tuskegee Institute, known today as Tuskegee University, and brought about significant growth for the school during his tenure. Washington saw education as key to the future of freed Black people, so he dedicated much of his time to producing Black educators. When these educators graduated and returned to their community to teach, they encountered obstacles like a lack of resources and funding. One of Washington's strengths was his ability to inspire philanthropists to invest in the education of Black Americans, as can be seen with his partnership with Rosenwald. To give communities a sense of ownership over the schools, Washington insisted local people be hired to build them. Sometimes the students themselves built the schools. To this same end, communities raised money for the buildings, and the Rosenwald Foundation matched those funds. The Rosenwald Foundation also provided communities with booklets to help design their school, resulting in a uniform look across all Rosenwald schools. The designs tended to be simple with traditional details: pitched roofs, steep overhangs, white trim, and whitewashed clapboard siding. The large windows on the schools allowed the maximum amount of light, important because many rural buildings did not have electricity at the time. The buildings were east-west facing to avoid heat during the day. To keep it cool in the summer, the building was raised off the ground, and the windows had breeze openings. Rosenwald school designs were so efficient that they were also used for schools not funded by Rosenwald. Madison County was home to 9 different Rosenwald schools: Conyers, Council, Farmers Capital, Grayson, Horton, Mount Carmel, Mount Lebanon, Silver Hill, and Tony. Several factors led to these schools falling in disuse in the 1950s. The 1954 Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court ruling that segregated schools were unlawful eventually led to the desegregation of schools throughout the South and allowed Black students to attend better funded schools. Also in the 1950s, industrialization in the northern United States meant better job opportunities, drawing people away from rural southern communities. All right, so we've covered early public education, we've covered the Rosenwald schools. Let's talk about the big 3, Huntsville's 3 big historic Black colleges and universities: Alabama A&M, Oakwood, and Drake State. We already touched on Council High School, which was named for Dr. William Hooper Council. Dr. Council was born into slavery in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and was taken to Huntsville by slave traders in 1857 at the age of 9. He escaped his enslavers before the end of the Civil War, but returned to Evanston, Alabama in 1865 to attend a school organized by the Freedmen's Bureau. Council's first enterprise as an educator was the Lincoln School, started in 1868 and located near the borders of Madison and Limestone counties. In 1875, he organized Huntsville's Normal School, which evolved to become Alabama A&M University. He served as president of the school and was a leader of the Black community until his death in 1909. He authored 3 works: Negro Laborer, A Word to Him, Lamp of Wisdom, or A Race Illustrated, and Future of the Negro. A&M University was started in 1875 by council at a church on Eustis Street under the name Huntsville Normal School. This first iteration of A&M University was, as the name suggests, a school for teachers. In 1878, the school expanded their coursework to include industrial education, a curriculum that focused on job skills rather than traditional education. And in 1881, the instructors at the school helped buy a standalone building on West Clinton, changing the school's name to State Normal and Industrial School of Huntsville. In 1891, the school became the recipient of the Morrill Act of 1890, an act that gave land to learning institutions to endow education in agriculture and mechanical arts. As was intended by the authors of the Morrill Act of 1890, this endowment provided educational opportunities for Black people in the southern states and helped make possible many historically Black colleges. This is when the school moved from Huntsville to Normal, Alabama, and became the State Agricultural and Mechanical College for Negroes. The school became a junior college in 1919 and began offering senior college level courses in 1939. In 1969, the name of the school was officially changed to Alabama Agricultural and Mechanical University. Alabama A&M has a very long history, but one of the most interesting aspects, in my humble opinion, is the anti-war protests, which were common during the Vietnam era, especially following incidents like the My Lai massacre, which took place on March 16, 1968, and in which more than 500 women, children, and elderly men were killed by American troops. This massacre was covered up until November 1969, and the news stunned Americans. This led to an increase in protests among the war and increased distrust even among soldiers, and even up to higher ranking officers. This photo on the right is of Alabama A&M and UAH students protesting the war in December of 1969. And we have several photos of these in the special collection. Moving on to Oakwood University, we need to talk about a few people here, the first of which is Ellen Gould Harmon White. She was a founder of and influential in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She believed it was the duty of the SDA Church to educate African American people in the South and to indoctrinate them. She was an advocate for the establishment of Oakwood, but only visited the school a few times in her life. Charles M. McKinney is often described as the first ordained Black minister in the SDA Church and was an advocate for the establishment of Oakwood School as well. McKinney resided in Huntsville in the year before the school was established and was said to have recommended the site for Oakwood, the Beasley Plantation. Oakwood Industrial School first opened in 1896 with 16 students. Students could choose a track for careers related to evangelism, or they could choose a track for trades that included farming, carpentry, teaching, nursing, masonry, and kitchen work. Around 1904, this institution was renamed the Oakwood Manual Training School and began offering degree programs comparable to the high school diploma. Also in 1904, the first Black teacher joined the faculty, and the first Black board member sat on the board. By 1917, Oakwood became a junior college and had an increase in enrollment from students from the northern states. The same year, Oakwood graduated 100 students. In 1943, Oakwood was changed to a 4-year college and was renamed Oakwood College. The first bachelor's degrees were awarded the following year. In 2007, quite the jump, the school began granting graduate degrees and became Oakwood University. For many years, presidents of Oakwood were white, and segregation was observed between white and Black faculty. Also, Black faculty members were paid significantly less than white employees. Students called school leadership out over this inequity, and their grievances over the school's focus on religious teachings over academic excellence. The board voted for a change in leadership and sought to appoint another white male president. 2 white men turned down the job before James L. Moran became the first Black president at Oakwood in 1932. This was a historic moment for Oakwood, not only because a Black president was installed, but because President Moran also had an all-Black faculty. This is an interesting woman. Ava B Dykes was the first African-American woman to fulfill the requirements for a doctoral degree. But because Radcliffe held graduation later in the spring in 1921, she was actually the third to graduate with a PhD. She joined the faculty at Oakwood University in 1944 and served as chair of the English department and the Division of Humanities. She taught at Oakwood for almost 4 decades. She was a talented pianist and organist, and she founded and named the school's choral group, the Aeolians. The Oakwood University Library is named in her honor. And finally, we have J.F. Drake State. Drake State is named for Dr. Joseph Fanning Drake. Dr. Drake was the 4th president of Alabama A&M University, serving from 1927 to 1962. A highly respected educator, Drake attended Talladega College and received his MA from Columbia Teachers College and a PhD from Cornell University. Drake has been praised as the builder and savior of A&M. He steered the school through the Great Depression, wars, financial hardship, and the civil rights struggle. He not only kept this school open, but he helped secure funding for numerous new buildings and helped promote growth in both staff and student population. Under his leadership, student population grew from 386 in 1927 to 1,307 in 1962. Drake State was originally called Huntsville State Vocational Technical School and was established in 1961 when Governor George Wallace founded a group of state 2-year technical institutions to support technical and vocational career education needs of African Americans. The school was constructed on land which was deeded to the State Board of Education by Alabama A&M. It opened in August 1962 with 27 students and facilities for education in cosmetology, automotive mechanics, and brick masonry. By the end of the year, an electronics course opened, increasing enrollment to 39 students. By 1970, it was providing short courses for the Army Reserve and the U.S. Army Missile Command, Redstone Arsenal. In 1966, it officially adopted the name J.F. Drake State Technical Trade School. In the late 60s, the school's involvement in the community increased dramatically, with such programs and services as training films for public relations, training assistance programs with other post-secondary institutions and industries, and the establishment of a school yearbook and newspaper. Workshops and training programs were jointly sponsored by the State Department of Education and Alabama A&M. Drake State Technical School was fully accredited by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools beginning in 1971. And in 1973, the Alabama State Board of Education approved a new name, changing Technical School to Technical College. In doing so, Drake State it could broaden its course offerings to include the Associate in Applied Technology degree. In 1981, the school expanded physically, constructing enough facilities to house all classes on campus rather than renting nearby properties. To this day, Drake State has sought to create job placement relationships between local industries and its students. In particular, it has grown to meet the changing needs of local industries, expanding to include classes on manufacturing technologies, applied services technologies, computer science and engineering, education, and health sciences. Once again, thank you for letting me present for you today. If you have any questions about this presentation or have any other research questions, you are welcome to contact me or any other special collections staff by phone or email.